Hello and welcome, everyone. Amazing. Great. So we will get started in just a moment as people are still joining from around the world. And while we are waiting, we would love to hear from you in the chat. Where are you joining us from today? Please let us know. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Wow.
Oh, from Brazil. What a start. New Orleans. Vienna, Switzerland, Istanbul, London, Paris, Cairo, wow, Cologne, Hamburg, Germany, Colombia, Florida, wow. From all around the world. Wonderful to have such an international audience with us. Maybe a short second question since still people are jumping in. What is the one word that comes to your mind when you hear the word innovation? Is there anything coming? Kazakhstan, undefined, creativity, success, Apple, business, opportunities. Wow. So fascinated to see how diverse our global community is. Thank you so much. Great. I think that's amazing. Change, motivation, courage. All topics we will discuss today as well. Co-creation, creativity, unlearning, and experimentation. Amazing. I would suggest we start the session. Good afternoon, good morning, and also good evening, everyone. My name is Elena Stelzig. I'm program manager and advisor at the Global Beta Drucker Forum, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's digital Drucker session, the care and feeding of innovation and how future-focused leaders inspire creative progress. And we are so delighted to be joined by two of the world's leading thinkers on innovation, leadership, and management, by Amy Edmondson and Roger Martin, in conversation with Julia Kirby. And before we begin, let me briefly share what makes the Global Peter Drucker Forum so unique. What's important is that we are not a conference about Peter Drucker. And we are also not just a conference. We are a global community and a movement which is inspired by Peter Drucker's thinking and by his belief that management is one of society's most important institutions. And in fact, I believe that Peter Drucker himself would have wanted us to focus not on him, but on the questions that matter most for the future. So for nearly 2 decades, the Global Peter Drucker Forum has brought together leaders, thinkers, entrepreneurs, academics, policymakers, and change makers from around the world to explore how management can contribute to a more innovative, prosperous, and also functioning society. What's important is that Peter Drucker saw management not simply as a business function, but as a real social responsibility and a force for progress. So the idea remains the heart of everything we do. And each year we bring together some of the world's most influential thinkers, executives, academics, and policymakers to address the most pressing management challenges of our time. And our ambition is not only to understand the future of management, but to really actively shape it. Because management matters, and it matters not only for organizations, but for society at large. And it shapes how people work together, how innovation happens, and how progress is achieved. And this is the reason why we bring together leading thinkers from all around the world, thinkers and practitioners from all around the world, to advance the practice of management for the benefit of society. And this commitment will once again come to life on November 4th and 5th, when the Global Peter Drucker Forum returns to the historic Hofburg in Vienna, Austria, for its 18th edition. And this year's theme is the next generation, the next gen innovation, when everything depends on ingenuity. And at a time when artificial intelligence is transforming the industries, geopolitical uncertainty is reshaping our markets, and organizations are being asked to do more with less, this ingenuity is becoming one of the most valuable leadership capabilities. So, questions like how do we create organizations that continue to innovate under pressure, or how do we foster creativity while maintaining efficiency and performance? These are exactly these kind of questions we will explore at the forum in November. And we are very excited to welcome amazing speakers such as Bill Anderson, the CEO of Bayer, Roger Martin, Amy Edmondson, Rita McGrath, Linda Hill, Jean-Pierre Pedrettieri, and Josef Aschbacher, among many, many others. And for those of who would like to join these conversations in Vienna, we also have an early bird registration until open until June 13th. So if you consider joining us, this is a wonderful opportunity to secure your place at a very attractive rate, and you will find all the information on the link in the chat as well. But before we look ahead to November, we want to focus on the questions that brings us together today. The questions: what can leaders do to create an environment where innovation thrives rather than stalls? And who better to help us answer that question than Amy Edmondson and Roger Martin? And a quick practical note before we begin: we kindly ask you to please use the chat actively throughout the session. Share your thoughts, reflections, and also your questions, because our team will collect the questions throughout the sessions and throughout the discussion, and we will dedicate the final part of the session to an audience Q&A. What's also important is that this session will also covered on LinkedIn, so feel free to join the conversation also on our social media channels, share your key takeaways, and tag the Global Peter Drucker Forum. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's moderator. Julia Kirby is Senior Editor at Harvard University Press and Program Curator for the Global Peter Drucker Forum. And for more than a decade, she has played an essential role in building and strengthening this relationship between Harvard and the Drucker Forum, and also was helping to shape many of the conversations that define our community today. So Julia, thank you for being with us. The virtual stage is now yours.
Okay, thank you, Elena. And let me immediately add my welcome to so many guests that we have joining us today, and especially to Amy Edmondson and Roger Martin, both of whose work we at the Drucker Forum have always found so valuable. And in case there are any who are tuning in who are new to these two thinkers, I'll just briefly mention Amy Edmondson is the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at the Harvard Business School, and quite renowned for giving us the concept of psychological safety, and then for doing the rigorous research to show how important it is to teams and organizations and how it can be built, and in far too many settings, how it is very neglected. You might have encountered that idea first in her book, Teaming: How Organizations Learn, Innovate, and Compete in the Knowledge Economy. Since then, Amy has written many other important articles and books, and I guess I'll mention most recently, The Fearless Organization. So welcome, Amy. And Roger Martin is probably also a familiar name, given all of his best-selling books like Playing to Win and The Opposable Mind and A New Way to Think. I could go on and on. He started out in strategy consulting, was the longtime dean of the Rotman School of Business, which is the University of Toronto's business school, and continues to advise the C-suites of some of the world's best managed companies. And here's something I never knew about Roger until today. In college, he was a good athlete and his standout sport was volleyball. Am I right about this, Roger? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's appropriate because in this conversation, we're going to be volleying back and forth between the two of you, probably with no very vicious spiking, since I know you two are
Yeah.
good friends. But
Yeah.
anyway, to start the game, I'm just going to quote Peter Drucker. And it's from one of the last books he published, Managing in the Next Society. And he was worried that many of the businesses that he studied and executives he advised weren't keeping up with the pace of change. And so here's the quote: "The large organization has to learn to innovate or it won't survive." So just as a sort of a warm up round, can I just get your kind of immediate initial tweet sized answer to like if Drucker somehow tuned in today, 25 years after he wrote that, then what's the good news, bad news that you might tell him? You know, have organizations learned to innovate better? And if so, in what respect? And in what respect have they not made much progress? So, Amy, what comes to mind to you?
Okay. Well, I'll say when I heard the quote, the first thought, which is probably, everybody's first thought, is that, well, obviously, right? That obviously you need to innovate to survive in a changing world. And yet I think the deeper observation, which is also more obvious than it was probably when he wrote it, is that large organizations struggle to innovate. The culture, the mindset, the incentives are so strongly oriented toward success that they simply cannot easily accommodate the failure that is essential in the innovation process. And by that, I don't mean bad, ugly, reputationally harmful failure, but small, smart failures that are absolutely essential to the innovation journey. So the cultures and the incentives and the leadership mental models need to change, particularly in large organizations. Small organizations or smaller organizations suffer less from that syndrome.
Okay, any good news to offer?
Well, I mean, I suppose I started with the good news, which is that by now we don't need to sell anyone on that
Okay.
idea, right? Everybody, I think innovation has become the rallying cry for a few years, that it's just we understand how important it is. And I think most leaders in large organizations also understand that they may not be organizationally as good at it as they want to be. So that motivation sets the stage for doing something about it. So that's the good news.
And Roger, what comes to mind for you, top of mind?
Well, one thing that immediately comes to mind is what Peter Drucker talked about is really hard. And I go back to, I mean, Peter Drucker's greatest management thinker of the 20th century, but in the top 10 for sure is a guy named Jim March, a longtime Stanford professor who wrote a very influential article in 1991 where he laid out this challenge of exploration versus exploitation, right? Exploitation being doing more of what you're already good at, exploration, trying things that you're not yet good at. And what he pointed out is that most organizations kind of are either on one side of that or the other, and it's hard to mix the two together. And a great leader, in my view, is the one who can somehow overcome the challenge that Jim March so cleverly laid out. And as most people know, I mean highly associated with a company called P&G, which has been around for 190 years and it has been quite successful. And I've watched 8 CEOs in my time there over the 40 years I've been working there. Uh, serve their time. There's a ninth now, Shailesh, who's just started, so I wanted to include him in this. But of the 8, when I was thinking about this and looking back on it, only half, would I argue, were able to do the job of managing the tension between exploration and exploitation, right? 4 of the 8. 2 of the 8 kind of went wildly overboard on exploration, right? Maybe attempting to do what Peter said, but didn't pay enough attention to exploitation and did a bad job. And two of the others focused so much on exploitation that the innovation ground largely to a halt. What Peter was worried about. So even in a company that's been around for 190 years at the top of its game, it's still a very difficult thing. So the bad news is it's hard, Julia. The good news is it's doable. Four of the eight did it and did it wonderfully in a very large scale organization, but it ain't easy.
You know, I love hearing that about, you know, the different eras, the different leaders, and how then the organization's ability changed because someone else was at the top. And I thought this is something that's actually also part of that Drucker quote, which is that he doesn't say, you know, leaders need to learn. He says organizations need to learn. Large companies need to learn. And so the idea that of that learning organization is something Amy has done so much work on. And the idea that you could do it right and then somehow not, the organization doesn't retain the knowledge of how to do it right. Anyway, I won't take us down, you know, an unintentional path here, but Roger, I guess I'll just ask you to keep talking because I want to give you the chance to sort of expand on either that very problem or maybe another one because
Sure.
You know what, you're a strategy expert. It does seem like business strategies today are just so much more centered on innovation ambitions. So, you know, take us to that intersection of strategy and innovation, and I guess how could organizations benefit from some new way to think about it?
Well, here's the thing, I guess that worries me a lot on the front of innovation. And what worries me a lot is unfortunately modern management and how it's taught. And the challenge is the following. So again, one of the smartest kind of Americans ever to live is a guy named Charles Sanders Peirce, who created pragmatist philosophy. And he pointed out in a series of lectures he did at Harvard in 1903, essentially that no new idea in the history of the world has come about through analysis. Right? No new idea in the history of the world has come about through analysis. Meanwhile, for the last 50 years, business schools have been teaching their graduates that you should make all your decisions based on rigorous data analysis. In fact, so far as to say, I think that you're sort of a bad person, a sloppy manager, if you don't. Now, this is a challenge for innovation, right? Because I think many people who have an innovative idea in an organization and they go to their boss and their boss says, well, Julia, that's very interesting and quite exciting. And if you can just kind of crunch the numbers, do the analysis and prove it up, you know, I would strongly consider green lighting that, Julia. And the executive, because they've been taught in a business school in the last 50 years, blithely thinks, I'm doing the right thing. I was taught this. I was taught this to make sure that I'm making rigorous data-based decisions. They don't realize that they're asking this person to engage in a task that has never been completed before in the history of mankind. That's all, Julia. Just do something that nobody's ever done in the history of the planet. And so what the Julia in this picture tends to do is scale back their innovative ambitions to something that's darn close to the status quo, right? Because there's lots of sort of quantitative proof that the status quo is producing what it's producing. And so one of the great kind of complaints of senior executives that I interact with is, wow, our innovations used to have, because they measure them, they have a NPV of 120 million per innovation, and now it's down to 8, and we're sort of making small little innovations and not big ones. And I think it's baked into modern management, literally baked into the way modern managers are taught. Now, I think that's not the only problem. And, actually, Amy and I, unbeknownst to many, probably one of our most important mentors in life was the same guy, the wonderful Chris Argyris. I know Amy had other mentors, I had other mentors, but boy, that one was important. And so there's a whole lot of behavioral things that I will leave Amy to talk about. But this technical problem is a large problem because Peirce kind of was right. Aristotle before him warned us against using scientific data analysis in what he referred to as the part of the world where things can be other than they are. Said there's two parts of the world, part of the world where things can't be other than they are. In that part of the world, if you sample from the past, it's indicative of the future because things can never change. Last time I checked, in the world of business, things always change. And he said, don't use the scientific method that I created in that part of the world. So we're teaching students to use the scientific method for everything when the guy who invented it said that's a terrible idea. And one of the smartest Americans ever to live said it won't get you innovation. That's a big problem.
So, I mean, it seems like what we're getting into is like, how do you allocate the resources that you might spend on innovation to different projects? And you're saying they're probably that people are always over allocating to stuff that's analyzable.
Yeah.
And looking at, and it's kind of, you say it's always been a problem. I would say maybe it's even a bigger problem now because everyone's sort of fallen in love with this idea of being very data driven.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so you're saying the data might drive you, right into a ditch, I guess.
Yeah. No. I mean, lots of innovation is the moral equivalent of searching for the car keys under the
Yeah.
lamppost. It's analyzable, and so let's focus there. Nope, that is not where innovation comes from.
Amy, do you want to respond to what you're hearing Roger talk about here?
I'm having so much fun back here, listening and thinking, and I wondered how long it would take before one of us, and if it hadn't been Roger, it would have been me, and it would have been soon, mentioned Chris Argyris, who indeed is the profoundly influential mentor we had in common. And wouldn't it be fun if Chris could be in this conversation? But I guess fortunately he can be channeled through us. So many things to react to, but one would be in, I think it's an old saying that which matters can't be measured, right? And that I think that saying applies very nicely to innovation because it can't be measured in the formal sense, right? In the usual sense that management systems like to measure things because it's by definition new, so we don't have the measure of it, and it's many of the activities of innovation are in management terms wasteful because not all of the activities produce a result, but some of them do. The problem is we don't know in advance which will. So innovation happens with a certain clarity about what we care about, the problems we're trying to solve, the things that our customers long for, the things that society needs, and so forth. And then, of course, ingenuity to try new things. Again, most will fail. And that requires, that combination right there requires the provision of slack, slack resources, slack time, or what is called by management waste. But by innovation, in innovation, it's not waste. It's just that we don't in advance know what the most important experiments will be. I think one thing we haven't talked about a lot yet is the degree of collaboration and cross boundary spanning or expertise boundary spanning that is often a part of the innovation journey. And that too doesn't submit well to the classic management mindset of kind of divide and conquer, but rather, how do we mix it up? How do ideas from your area combine with ideas from mine to produce the possibility of something new? There too, very hard to manage, but we can create the conditions whereby it's more likely, I guess. And that becomes what the management opportunity is to do that. I guess I'll say one more thing and channeling Chris, because the tensions we've been talking about, right, between efficiency and innovation, between the short-term execution and doing it well, and today's profitability and tomorrow's profitability or innovation. It's always hard for organizations, especially large ones, to take the future seriously, right? To really believe in that. And I think we can, and the good leaders that Roger was talking about do solve the dilemma by making it discussable. And that's me channeling Chris's wisdom. But when we do, as we're doing here in this conversation, when we name the dilemmas and say, okay, they exist, they won't go away. The opportunity is, let's talk about it and let's figure out at what moment in time we're going to err on one side or the other. How do we navigate it? How do we rename the waste and turn it into slack, an opportunity that actually is getting us where we need to go tomorrow? How do we value tomorrow as much as we value today?
Yeah,
Yes.
and if I can just pick up on, because I think, as usual, Amy's brilliant, and no, but the point but pointing to Slack, I think is a super important one, and I think lots of CEOs, um, either purposely or inadvertently, hand away Slack, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so you'd often think a hugely
Yeah.
profitable company that's earning well above its cost of capital would have lots of the slack that Amy points out is super important for innovation. It's like, hey, we're doing great. We're going to take some of that money and invest in the future, right? Would seem fair. But if you're a CEO, right, and you go to the capital markets and say, look at the quarter we just had. Wasn't that awesome? And then they shoot your stock price up dramatically because you've talked it up. Then that becomes the new chinning bar, and you've just
Sure.
given away all your slack. You've absolutely given it away. And they say, oh, no, 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 no. We don't want you to earn whatever, a 15% return on your book equity. We would like you to earn a 15% return on your market equity, which is 3 times what your book equity is. So you have to have everything make 45% ROE. And it's hard to have a brand new project that you're trying to develop for the future earn that. So you've just handed over your slack. And this is why this is why I tell my CEO clients, do not ever give
Right.
the capital markets that red meat. Um, it takes away the very slack that Amy, I think, has correctly pointed out that you've got to have. You need to guard that slack very, very, very judiciously and carefully, because once it's gone, then it does feel like a horrible
Yeah.
trade-off. Do I feed that beast with current earnings, or do I hold something back for the future? Well, actually, I can't, because I have to feed the beast. Don't get the beast excited.
So, Roger, like if you're advising a leader of an organization about this problem, what are some of the things you're telling them to do? That they could actually start doing Monday, I guess, or in the next quarter or whatever.
Sure. Well, one is hide how well you're doing. Um, legally, but don't get out ahead of yourself and say everything's going to be great. So that's one thing. A second thing has to do with how you think about data and analysis. And what I say to executives is the following. Seems to work. I say, listen, you care about data, all right? The problem with the next 6 months is there is no data about the next 6 months. Last time I checked, 100% of the world's data is in the past. But you got no data about the next 6 months. That's a bummer, right? Because if you want to do something new, you don't have any data about it. That's the bad thing about the next 6 months. The good thing about
Yeah.
6 months is in 6 months, if you turn around and look behind you, well, there's lots and lots of data there. And so your job should be to productively turn the future into the past. If you just sort of randomly lollygag your way into the future, you actually don't create useful data, right? If instead you say, I'm going to try X, and if it works, I'm going to expect Y data results, then you can do it. And 6 months later, ask the question, how close to Y were we? And if the answer is quite close, you might want to up the ante and try some more, turning the future into the past. And if you're way off, you can stop before you've wasted a lot of cash on doing something where your theory is not proven out with future events, future data being collected. So what I tell them is the way to think about innovation is this step of trying, learning, and building your confidence, because at some point you're going to have to make the $2 billion bet, not the $50 million bet. And you have to prepare yourself by creating data in the future that gives you the confidence to act. Those would be probably the two things that I tell them. Plus, I tell them, never, ever, 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 when somebody comes to you with an innovation, this is channeling Chris, never, ever, ever tell them you got to prove it before I'll
Right.
because they will just go away and cry.
Yeah, and maybe that's going to take us straight into, psychological safety, as that's a component of it. But
Yeah.
what you're talking about also reminds me of Jeff Bezos's phrase at Amazon, which is that he needs to take what is usually an institutional no and turn it into an institutional yes, so that things don't get killed off at low levels, because a manager doesn't have this, the slack to grant someone to develop something. But how can you encourage things to move into experimentation and then to scale up to a higher level of experimentation? So I think that's a nice way of putting it too, the institutional yes. Amy, let's hear how you would pinpoint a problem that is fixable, that your research says is solvable, and expand on it for us.
But early on, so I'm not sure if this is what you're inviting me to discuss, but early on in the introduction, you said that I've done research on psychological safety, and certainly there's plenty of evidence that it's associated with all sorts of good performance outcomes, including innovation. And you said also that there's evidence that not everyone is doing this well, and indeed that's true. But I increasingly want to be clear that it is normal and natural for people to lack psychological safety. It actually is effortful and deliberate to put in place the conditions where people have psychological safety. And let me be very clear about what I mean by psychological safety. It's permission for risk taking. The interpersonal risks of speaking up with a crazy idea, of asking for help, of admitting a mistake, calling attention to a failure. Those things bring what psychologists call interpersonal risk. They're not fun in organizations. They're usually not rewarded, so people hold back, right? That's just a given. That's the normal, natural human and organizational condition. And yet there are special places, usually at the team level, where people realize that's what we do around here. That's what's expected around here because, and the because might be because the flight's safety is at risk, the patient's safety is at risk, the innovation of our team is at risk if we don't, right? So they find ways to nurture the unnatural act of taking those kinds of interpersonal risks. The other element of psychological safety is the risk, to try things that might not work out perfectly. So the kinds of things we're talking about, innovation. Innovation requires people to take risks. You mentioned Bezos, so I'll say perhaps my favorite quote from Jeff Bezos is, if you know in advance it's going to work, it's not an experiment, right? So it's, innovation requires lots of experimentation, and many people, because of a lack of permission for risk taking or a belief that any failure will be, fatal, will not take the kinds of risks they need to take either interpersonally or in terms of the substance of the work that are needed for both quality and for innovation. So psychological safety can be built. How do you do it? Well, you do some of what we're doing here, which is you call attention to reality. You call attention to the uncertainty, the challenge, the many forces going against what we're trying to do, the many forces that will make us unsuccessful in the future if we don't do hard things today. You invite engagement in very proactive ways, both through the words of leaders, but also through the structures that you put in place to enable teams to experiment and have the resources they need and so forth. And finally, you reward truth-telling and you reward smart failures, and you keep creating that kind of climate, especially for the people trying to do the innovation work.
And
The point about, sorry, Roger.
I was going to just, I want to build on Amy's point about risk and how can you sort of de-risk things and
Yeah.
he's pointing about one of
Yeah.
them. And here, and you'll like this because this comes out of ladder of inference or from Chris, but the technique that I use, Amy, is I encourage people to ask what I call the most important question in strategy: what would have to be true? So you posit an
Love it.
idea, and then along with it, you say, well, what would have to be true about the customers, the distribution channel, the competitors, our capabilities, our cost structure? You lay out this story, which Amy would be the ladder of inference,
Yeah.
got you to the point of I think we should try this, and then you try it and you can more closely identify what went wrong if it doesn't go wrong. Ah, the thing that had to be true about the distribution channel wasn't true. So that you can feel a lot better about we got the other seven things kind of right. We missed a little bit on that one, and also take corrective action. If we tweak this, could we overcome that? If instead you just say, hey, I got this great idea, let's do X, and then it doesn't work out, you're left with a very difficult learning journey. It's a lot of ex post rationalization at that point. It's, I guess this mustn't have happened or that. If instead, like a good experimenter, right? Like I'm not against being scientific. I'm against being slavishly data
Right.
analytic. If you're scientific and you lay out the full logic structure of it, you will learn. And in my experience, the person who proposed the thing that ended up not working out so well is looked upon less negatively by their colleagues because it's like there's just this one thing, and often you can tweak it.
It does seem like there's such a tendency in organizations that when something doesn't work perfectly, then they're inclined to say, well, that didn't work, scrap
Yeah.
it, instead
Yeah.
of asking, well, what about it didn't work, and
Yeah.
how do we zero in on the thing that would then make it work better? But it just seems like they're reverting to some psychological, comfort zone of saying, oh, thank God, we don't need to do that because it didn't work. Let's just forget about it.
Move on. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Cut our losses.
Let's
Right?
avert our eyes, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
avert our eyes.
Yeah.
It's a mindset, and you know, the only bone I would pick with Roger at all, but I know he will be in agreement with this, is that scientific method. I mean, I think that when we're referring to, say, a sort of management view of the scientific method, then it's, you know, data, 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 measure, 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 stay in the lines. But the scientific method, I'm married to a scientist,
Yeah.
means, you know, going out into the unknown every day. It means accepting that 70% of the experiments you run end in failure, and yet still having, you know, blockbuster papers around those that succeed. And so, you know, scientists, actually, I often will find myself saying to leaders, you've got to think more like a scientist. In fact, that was my Drucker master class last
Yeah.
and little, you know, blog last year, because it's that absolute willingness to set a direction, but never fall prey to the idea that you have all the answers.
Yeah.
And it's seeing your job as enabling others rather than as primarily evaluating them. You know, are they any good? Did they do what I said? Did they do it well? Versus did they take appropriate risks? Did they bring in new knowledge and, you know, and new bits that we can now repurpose in some other way, right? It's a very different mindset, and it's a different way of leading and viewing others.
Yeah, and you correctly called it out. We're in violent agreement as usual on that. Like the true scientist does what I'm saying, because they're not trying to find the truth. They're
Right.
trying to eliminate things that are just plain wrong and stumble in a positive direction. Um, but I would say, Amy, and this is a, self-critique. Like, I was a business school dean, and for 15 years, you're still a business school prof. I don't think business education has honored enough the true nature of science, and I
Oh, I
think
agree.
think
I agree.
and I think it's sad. And I think
Yep.
it's sad because they've reduced science to crunch the number and get the R squared, and say yes if it's a high one and no if it's a low one, and it just doesn't feel
Right.
like any true, great scientist like George, your husband, would look at it and say, "Oh, aren't those MBAs being so scientific?" He'd say, "What? You're calling that like?" So I
Yeah, you
I
know,
think business education has got to fix itself if we're
I
going to
agree.
be a nice environment.
Profound and enthusiastic agreement. And I don't think it's not a matter of, oh, they just have to go do it. It's a matter of, actually, we have to invent it, right? This is a design problem, not a simple selection. Okay, we had curriculum A, now we got to shift to B, and everything would be better. Like, we don't necessarily know how to do B at scale.
Yeah.
And to, you know, to build on that, the course I teach, which you would recognize, you know, in my every single class I teach, you would recognize the words coming out of my mouth and coming out of the students' mouths as profoundly influenced by Chris Argyris. But what the course is called Making Difficult Decisions. And these are we don't mean, oh, it's really hard, put it into the spreadsheet and you'll figure it out. It's like, these are the kinds of decisions for which there are different points of view. Reasonable people disagree. The stakes are high, and there's uncertainty, you know, uncertainty that won't go away. And what I argue is, when those three conditions are present, your only prayer is the leading of a good process. And by a good process, I mean a good discussion,
Yeah.
bringing thoughtful people together who disagree, walking down ladders of inference, proposing ideas, poking them, what would have to be true if, you know, really high quality inquiry, high quality advocacy, and maybe, just maybe, we'll get somewhere. We'll get somewhere closer to a good hypothesis, and then we'll act, but hopefully act in a way that isn't catastrophic if we happen to still be wrong. But it's, you know, and so I spend a whole semester trying to teach how to do this. And yet, as you know, it's really skilled, but not skilled in the sense that, you know, many things in business are skilled, but skilled in the sense of, it starts with you, right? If you're not able
Yeah.
to become a learner rather than a knower, you won't be able to play this sport. And some portion of the classroom really cannot, at this point in their life, shed the knowing bit to embrace the learning bit.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I'd love to take that course.
Yeah, well, you've already taken it, but we'd love to have you.
But I'm sure and I'd come. If you asked me, I'd come.
Listen, I want to interrupt because we're now 46 minutes into our hour together, and this time has just flown. But and I really want to honor some of these fantastic questions that are coming in from our guests. But I also want to say to everyone, thank you so much for these questions, because as we're thinking about the program for November's whole forum on the subject of innovation management, I always believe that the key to a great session is that there's a great question at the heart of it that we can create a debate around. And there are just so many in this list. I guess here's one that I think is probably on a lot of people's minds. It's just, the way the person phrased it is John Cotter proposed the idea of a dual operating system that you should have in a company, where you've got your traditional hierarchy. So we could use the Jim March term, you've got the exploitation division, I guess, coexisting with, a more agile network focused on innovation. And, lots of people have talked about that. Look, you can't get both out of one operating system. You have to somehow hive off your innovation function. But what do you make of that? What do you agree with that approach?
Well, I'm happy to start. It's always made me kind of queasy, the idea that the only way to do this is to keep them apart. In part because of some of the stuff Amy talked about, you need to have people who think differently, together. I actually think that some of the greatest CEOs who are innovation oriented needed an exploitation oriented CFO beside them to make decisions together. So it's always made me queasy. I am an idealist. Face it, Roger. I would love to see an organization that's trained in the ways that Amy was talking about her class. If the entire MBA program had that spirit, let's say, so they were trained, that you could pull it off, where you have an organization that at the same time honors exploitation and exploration and can have productive conversations across that. But that might be the idealistic answer. Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's almost idealistic, maybe that's not the right word, but to believe that you can divide and conquer, right? That you guys do the executing, we'll do the exploring. But I think I really liked Cotter's that the book, and I forget what Execute or something had an eight in it. But there is. I think it's very important to name both goals, to have them be discussable, to talk about the tensions that come between them, and then to evaluate the systems you have to ensure that you're doing enough of both and doing both at high quality. But I also don't like I don't like our thinking about the distinction so sharply, because execution, I think it's tempting to think execution is just do it, right? Just execute to spec. But the Toyota production system is this living, breathing example of how execution is itself a learning process, right? Even if it's not innovation with a capital I, it's day-to-day ingenuity with a small I for sort of problem solving and vigilance and attentiveness and learning building into the execution. So I like to think about execution as a learning process in its own right, and just the amount that's already known versus unknown shifts as you do some activities versus others. Manufacturing, largely known with some little bits of space for innovation and ingenuity. and, R&D largely unknown, with a little bit of space for good execution of the experiments and processes that you engage in.
Okay, I'm going to move to another question. This is, I think, a neat question because it's saying, it seems to be a connection between innovation and urgency and a sense of necessity. So it says innovation often flourishes when necessity creates urgency. But in successful organizations, I guess I might use the term fat and happy, comfort can become the enemy of change. And how can leaders create enough urgency to drive innovation? And this person adds, without undermining psychological safety. So, but this idea of urgency and whether you need to create a sense of that and how you would do that, I want an answer from both of you on whether that's necessary and how you would do it if it is.
This may be words, and I'll just say a quick thing. And I've been getting messages that my internet's unstable. So go to Roger if you lose me. But linguistics, right? So urgency technically means fast. But I think we tend to use that word to mean important. And so I think it is important. I think it is important for leaders to create that sense of the absolute importance of inventing the future today, right? And then getting people on board. So even if it isn't a crisis, and it's not obvious we have to solve this by tomorrow, we still can put that same passion into the work. And I think where we get the innovation is where we get the passion. So it may automatically come, but not fully automatically with crisis, but it can be generated by good leaders who paint a picture of why this matters and create the opportunities for people to sign up, roll up their sleeves, and work together to make things happen.
I concur entirely, and I would say in my own life, crisis has been important. I call what would have to be truth the most important question in strategy, and it came out of a terrible day of a 2-day seminar with the management team where they just fought all day on the first day, and I said they're going to fight all day the second day unless I come up with something to do better. And I invented something that evening that's become one of the most important things I've created. And so I don't downplay it. And just again on people often ask me what's the difference between a good strategic CEO and a not so good one, and it relates to this. And I say a good CEO can play forward the status quo and say, if we continue this way, these things are going to happen, and have that clarity that causes them to say, we have to do something soon, or that thing is going to happen. And so I think that's a skill, being able to play forward a picture to say, if we do this and they do that and they do that, ooh, we're going to be kind of stuck. Let's do something today because we don't want to be there. And so it's a form of storytelling about the future that creates that sense of importance to do something now before it's too late. And my partner in crime in writing Playing to Win, A.G. Lafley, that was one of his absolutely strongest capabilities. He could paint vivid pictures where people said, holy smokes, you're right, A.G., we got to get going on X. He was awesome at that.
One of the questions here reminds me of something I used to ask people at in interviews I did for Harvard Business Review, which is what's a hypothesis that you have, but you can't prove, nobody's done the research on it, but that you think a good research project could be built on, relating, of course, to innovation. But what is it that is a burning question that we just don't? We've talked about kind of problems with business education, but we haven't really talked about business research and where maybe it could have something new to say about a burning question.
I would test the one that Amy talked about. I mean, the proposition is that skunk works and separating it out gets you more, better, whatever, superior innovation. I think Amy and I, from the sounds of it, Amy's with me and deeply suspicious that disintegration is actually helpful. That would be an interesting one to hypothesis. The hypothesis would be actually kind of waiting till a future time to reintegrate the disintegrated into the organization doesn't work as well as doing the hard work to integrate as we go along. That would be one that strikes me.
Yeah. I think that's a really good one. I would that made me think, because when you started talking about separation, and I really don't think there's been a good study that would compare that model, sort of the skunkworks model, with the more integrated one, but maybe a related one and more current, or a current burning question that we see a lot of writing about, relates to the impacts of remote work on innovation. And there's certainly plenty of hypothesized mechanisms that could be put forward to articulate why there's some interesting research questions in there, but it's certainly salient and current.
And if I just throw one quickly on the table, Julia, it would be really interesting to do some kind of a test of what I would call the current approach to developing one's argument skills is to focus on you making good arguments. You take debate classes and debate clubs. I'd be interested to have somebody really study the question of, would you be farther ahead if you trained people on how to understand other people's arguments?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, like wouldn't it that would be kind of interesting because like again, if I could have my way at an MBA program, the first thing I would do in the fall semester would have, before starting anything, would have a course on diagnosing other people's arguments. Literally getting good at that.
This is
really good. Really good.
Class the case method, it would be perfect for Harvard Business School because it would make the case method discussions so much better than saying, I'm right, Amy, you're wrong. This is why I'm so smart. And instead of, Amy,
I hear you saying,
you
I think.
freaked me out with what you said. I think you said this. Am I right? And then you said no, and I'd learn.
And would this be an example of that? And is this a good illustration? And
we don't teach that.
Yeah. No,
except in your class.
Except in my class, but again,
which is a second-year elective, right?
No, a second-year elective, and we get lots of people, but I'm only, one or two sections at most. So,
so I just saw that my friend Lenka put in a comment. This session is not long enough. We need another hour.
We'd like to leave you thinking
we
that.
Don't have it. So I need to, I guess, hand over to Elena, and and you can. Sorry that I didn't give you much time to wrap up, but thank you, Roger. Thank you.
Here's my idea.
Thank you so much.
Do a second hour at the Drucker Forum Live.
That's it.
That's exactly what we suggest. Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you so much, Amy and Roger, for this insightful discussion. And if today's discussion sparked new ideas, we warmly invite you to continue the conversation with us at the Global Peter Drucker Forum on the 4th and 5th November in Vienna, Austria, in the Hofburg. And the forum is known for bringing together not only some of the most influential management thinkers, but also exceptionally engaged and a very diverse community of executives, of entrepreneurs, of academics, and change makers. So if you consider joining us, this is a really great opportunity to secure your place now. As I already told you, the early bird registration is currently open until June 13th. You find here the QR code and also the registration information in the chat. There is also a recording of today's session. So for everyone who wants to listen to it again, This recording will be made available to all registered participants. Thank you so much again to Amy, Roger, and Julia, and thank you all for being part of this global community. For all of those who need to leave now, we wish you a wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're joining us from. And for everyone who would like to stay a little longer, we will now move into a short community networking session